You might think that Max Verstappen has clinched the 2022 F1 title rather early, but what about if it was clinched in the summer? This is a short view back to the past to when the F1 title was decided in July.
Gentlemen, a short view back to the past.
Michael Schumacher's time at Ferrari is of course legendary. He'd finally ended Ferrari's long wait for a Drivers' World title in 2000, and he comfortably beat David Coulthard to the 2001 title, but the next season took things up a notch. The F2002 was perhaps the first F1 car to be fully optimised, by which I mean it wasn't particularly revolutionary in any one area, it was just brilliant across the board. Had high levels of downforce, an engine that was regarded to be roughly on a par with the benchmark BMW engine that Williams used, and it had Bridgestone tyres specifically designed for it. While Michelin had to develop tyres that were useful on both the Williams and the McLaren cars, which are their top representatives, Bridgestone were very much focused on Ferrari and specifically Schumacher himself, which meant a much more symbiotic relationship. The team of Jeanton and Ross Brawn also had fantastic quality control. Their reliability was unbelievable. Michael Schumacher finished all 17 races that season, and during that time he scored 11 wins, 5 seconds and one terrible third place finish, which was actually scored in Malaysia round 2, which he did in the old car, the 2001 car, and after a crash with Juan Pablo Montoya at the first corner. So a disastrous day resulted in a third place finish. There was also a controversial clash between Schumacher and Montoya at the Brazilian Grand Prix when the Ferrari moved across on the Williams, but really thereafter the Ferrari was so strong that there wasn't really an opportunity for anyone to go wheel to wheel with Schumacher. Montoya actually matched Schumacher's tally of 7 pole positions during the season, but he didn't get a single victory. The San Marino Grand Prix was perhaps the first time when everyone else realised just how good the F2002 was going to be. Schumacher and his teammate Rubens Barrichello qualified and finished first and second and set fastest laps that were half a second clear of the field, and that's really set the tone for the season. Just an interesting note, Ferrari is reputed to have spent $500 million on its F1 programme in that season. Now, to put that into context, that's more than 3 times the current budget cap in F1. So I think we probably do need a budget cap, an absolutely enormous sum of money, and on a smaller calendar. Now, inevitably, some people complain that Ferrari was ruining the championship, and they did make some fairly odd decisions. The most famous one, of course, was the Austrian Grand Prix, where on one of the few days where Barrichello was quicker than Schumacher, he was asked to move aside and let his team leader take the victory. It was incredibly unpopular and led to one of F1's not so sensible rules about team orders, which then had to be rescinded later. There's probably a separate video in all that nonsense. And then they also had a ridiculous finish at the US Grand Prix. But really, the fault lay with all the other teams that simply didn't do as good a job. Generally, the Williams chassis wasn't really good enough to make the most of the powerful BMW engine, whereas McLaren had the opposite problem. The MP417 was actually quite a good chassis, but the Mercedes was underpowered. Ferrari were just better across the board. Schumacher arrived at Magny-Cours for the French Grand Prix, which was round 11 of 17, with a 54-point lead in the championship. Now, that was when a win was just 10 points, not the 25 points of today, so an enormous lead, which had been assisted by the fact that any unreliability at Ferrari seemed to go Barrichello's way. It was actually one of Schumacher's harder weekends that season. He didn't qualify on pole, that went to Montoya's Williams, and Montoya actually led the early stages. Schumacher then also picked up a penalty for crossing the white line on the pit entry after a confusion with Ross Brawn over the radio. Into the closing stages, Ferrari had sort of decided that they were probably only going to be second behind Kimi Raikkonen's McLaren. But then, as luck would have it, which is obviously the one thing that they really needed that season, was that Raikkonen hit some oil at the Adelaide hairpin, slid wide, Schumacher got a run and went into the lead. He secured yet another victory and clinched the crown, and it was the 21st of July. There were still 6 races to go and 3 months of the season left to play out. Now, when Autosport did our top 10 victories of Michael Schumacher's F1 career, we didn't pick any from the 2002 season, perhaps because it looked so easy. If you're looking for one that's close to perfection, his drive in the Belgian Grand Prix probably deserves a mention. He completely obliterated everyone in the qualifying and the race and set a fastest race lap that was a clear second away from Rubens Barrichello, and he was the second fastest, and the next car was another second back. It was a completely dominant performance and probably as close to perfection as they managed that season. Schumacher ended the season on 144 points. Barrichello was second with 4 wins and 77 points, and Montoya was third for Williams on 50 points, so barely a third of Schumacher's overall total. But perhaps the most remarkable stat is that Ferrari's score of 221 points is equal to all the other 10 teams combined. So they scored 50% of all the available points that season. A truly remarkable record. The F2002 tends to get overshadowed by the even more remarkable F2004, came along a couple of years later and held many of the lap records for many, many years after F1 changed the rules. But I think the F2002 does deserve to be remembered as one of the truly great Grand Prix cars. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to click the like button and subscribe, and do let us know in the comments if there are any other more stories you'd like us to look at in future. And do take a look at Motorsport TV for some other great motorsport videos.